Welcome to Method, where we decode what it really takes to build and scale startups. I'm Andy Walsh, founder and strategist. Each week we'll bring you actionable insights and real stories. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to Method Startups Decoded. In this episode we're joined by the amazing Crystelle Desnoyer. I've known Christelle for a few years now here in New York. Quite an amazing operator as far as, I would say, people, culture, operations. There's a lot that goes into Christelle's history. I'll let her do the full introduction, but first and foremost, welcome, Christelle.
Thanks so much, Andy, for having me today. Really exciting to kick off your podcast in the early episodes, and thanks for having me.
It's great. It's just so good to sit down with people that have done fascinating things in their career and unpack and pick their brains as far as what they're doing and why. And I'm a person who loves to learn, and I like a good conversation as well. So I feel like today's going to be a good one. So you've had such an interesting background from the startup world into more corporate world. Can you just give us like a bit of context as far as where you started out in the startup space and what sort of things that you've been working on?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, obviously, just like you have an accent, and moving to the US was no easy feat. So I went to grad school in San Francisco, and that was my way in, and then I just got a one-way ticket to New York and have been here ever since. So it's been 14 years now. And unfortunately, you know, being a 22, 23-year-old with no experience, no MBA, coming out of business school, I couldn't actually get into the consulting companies, which is a standard path coming out of business school. So I found this consulting company that was, in fact, not really a consulting company. It was and it wasn't, in that it had all the execution that went with it. And so I ended up supporting European SMEs establishing themselves in the US in tech, so doing software and hardware. So anything that went from quantum lasers that fill probably a whole New York apartment all the way to microelectronics and, you know, SaaS, plugins, you name it. I've worked in all different fields over a very, very short amount of time and worked my way up, managing projects all the way to 12 companies simultaneously that we were building the US entities. So it was crazy and absolutely loved it. And that's where I learned to learn fast, actually. That was probably one of my first skills that I could add to my toolbox.
In the tech world, things are changing a lot, and being able to not only be pragmatic in the sense of know that on a daily basis things will change rapidly, but also from a skill set perspective, how do you sort of stay in front of things that are happening? And I think that getting in at the grassroots level, like you just described, feels an induction of fire of sorts, but it's also the best way to get well-rounded skills to be able to understand a startup company at large.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And what's interesting, you mentioned the career path, and I've been reflecting upon that a lot lately. So in my 20s, I was very selfish. All I wanted was to get out of my tiny town in France and go discover the world and learn as quickly and as much as I could, right? So in my 20s, that's really what I did. And I was really hungry and eager to just get as much as I could in my brain. And I got a lot of help and support. And what's been really great in my 30s is that I've been, you know, giving it back to the ecosystem and just, I never realized how much I had intaken so quickly. And that's, you know, what afforded me to be the youngest in the room in my corporate life, you know, to share that with the generations above me, Gen X boomers, and then, you know, bring it back to the ecosystem and support founders that are building, you know, their own thing and also maybe in their late 20s. And so it's been really great, I have to say, the past few years to do that.
Yeah, and I've definitely been fortunate to have met you and your community here in New York. Your passion to let people discover each other, curated by you quite often, and find ways to be able to do something fun. And I think that I've already got a lot of things out of this, and the community part of that is as important as the technical skills, right? And we both come from that space where connections and community are core to driving not only our careers, but helping everyone collectively. And I want to sort of look at something you just said then, as far as that giving back part. from you in your first job out of studying at university, you described like a lot of different things that you had to do, building multiple companies at the same time. Was there someone within that team or even through those years that was sort of giving you more than what you probably realized at the time? That on reflection, you look back and go, okay, that person or those people were really instrumental in sort of giving me more than what I probably took, at that time?
I mean, I have a very special relationship with all my CEOs. I've had the privilege to report to CEOs my entire career. And I think, CEOs are a special breed of humans. They've been through their own journey before they got there. And so, some of them are better mentors or coaches than others, obviously, because that's a skill set in itself. But my very first boss, he was like such a visionary, and he's the one who taught me to network, actually. But network in a meaningful way. So not network in there's a lot of debate right now on networking transactionally is a good or bad thing. And, there's never a black and white situation. We're adults. So, but he's the one who taught me to connect creatively. And sometimes it was so far-fetched that I would look at him and be like, how did you even make that connection? And I think he's the one who taught me that specific thing. If I had to pinpoint one thing, he taught me a lot, obviously, but he gave me a lot of rein, and he knew also that I was a fast learner and an executive, early on, and so he kind of let me do my thing and figure things out by myself, and he figured out that I learned that way as well, and so he was a great boss in that specific way. But definitely creative networking, connecting those dots, he's the one who taught me that early.
And the thing with networking, I love where it feels like it gives back to you without the intention of that happening, where you're able to connect to people, you learn something, someone may get access to something that they wouldn't otherwise. And it feels like there's this really nice perpetual sort of cycle that happens where you're able to yourself get these amazing things happen to you because you've helped someone else out. And I love that here. And I think New York, for me, is one of those cities that has a really strong community, and I have a genuine sense that people do want to help you out, and they're trying to help lift you up, and I think that's pretty rare in the startup world.
I agree. I mean, New York has such a culture of connecting with others. Most people are events, multiple events a week, right? Just to connect with people. Sometimes it's intentional. They're looking for something specific. Actually, most of the time that's the case, right? What you're talking about is the serendipitous networking, which is great, but people are such type A's here that I don't know that that's what occupies most of people's time, let's say. People are quite intentional, and that's what I love about it. For me, the word community gets thrown around a lot, especially in companies that trying to build community, to build pipeline, blah, blah, blah. So community, it's more that sense of belonging. It's a lot more emotional than transactional. And it's, when you're building a company, it's just such a lonely thing. You literally feel like a failure every day, even if that's not the case, right? But that's how you feel. You're not doing enough. You're not doing it fast enough. You're not meeting the right people. You don't have them in your network, etc. That ongoing perfectionist voice, right? And so being in that community or group of people that actually feel that way and are able to vulnerably share. And that's the thing, right? When you're part of a community, it's not just having common interest. That's a superficial way of doing it and connecting. It's more like being able to vulnerably communicate, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me out? Because you have that skill set. Or, hey, I really need this type of mentor or person because I failed at doing this. And really being open to sharing the journey. I think that's what makes a community strong versus a community that's just superficial, if that makes sense. So again, the word community is thrown around a lot, but it's more about the strength of it and how people connect with one another. And that's what I care about the most. And so sometimes it's hard to connect, right? And I happen to go in deep with people when I do connect, and they're part of my network. And so what I love doing is connecting, at the end of the day, my friends, and that's a community you're referring to, is people that I know deeply in certain levels and have been vulnerable with myself, and building that trust equity with them and being able to have that reversed. And it's just a two-way street, and being able to build a net of people that are able to do that and have that EQ mindset and possibilities is incredible. And it's still happening, right? Not everybody in that community that you're referring to has connected at the same level that I've connected with them. And so obviously it takes time, but I'm looking forward to really having happen. And I don't know, maybe we'll talk about it in a year and see what happens or what didn't happen out of it. But it's really important for me to connect people
Yeah.
all the time, just because I have that ability to do that really quickly and really deeply. And so I support people in doing that. And a lot of the founders I've supported last year, I have to count. I was actually writing a LinkedIn post to kick off 2025 on that topic, is the founders I've supported, whether like full on advisory boards or just had an office hour with them. And that's really what they needed the most, is to connect with the right people to make things happen. And so that's magical. I love sparking those.
Yeah, and it's definitely very powerful, and I think for me it's put us here, and I'm very thankful for that's happened. So the topic today, and it's very connected to what you just sort of touched on there, is how can founders scale high performance teams? And you talked about community. Community happens, and from a startup perspective, it starts within the company, right? It starts at foundational culture, the founders, what they're building, and ultimately how they scale their business. So in the early stage, just getting into the, like, I guess the foundations or building blocks of company culture, operations, and how all those things come together. I'd love to set that up as far as like what type of things you're looking at, like just to help understand you and the type of thing you look at within these businesses. Like how do those things come together from a people and operations perspective?
There's a lot to unpack there. So recruiting is such a skill set, especially depending on the phase of the company. So let's start with the day one of building a company. You have to hire your first employee, right? Those people are going to be heroes. They're going to be people that are intrinsically motivated, that are probably underpaid, that are in for the journey. They believe in you as a founder. And sometimes it's not always you. Sometimes it's just a mission or the idea. And they'll come on board despite you sometimes, right? So that happens also. And it's really about able to gauge that intrinsic motivation, but also that tolerance for pain and the values that you have, right? So like when I was hiring at Pomelo, for instance, I think I started December 10th, if I remember correctly, as a first employee. There was nothing. We didn't have a name. We didn't even know what we were going to sell, right? And I had to hire 2 people. And what I cared about the most was, okay, are these people going to actually like be in it with me, work long hours, work weekends, and really care about the mission, which was supporting female empowerment. So yes, we were, in the influencer marketing business, and we eventually decided to sell hair care. I had never done beauty in my life, right? And frankly, it didn't really matter. It was about the messaging and the mission behind it. So selling sustainable hair care and supporting women and feeling confident, right? Like that was the thing that we defined early, the why. And so I was able to go find people that really cared about that were motivated because they just wanted to build their careers and learn a lot fast. And so you really have to define what you're looking for and why you're looking for it, right? And then, in a way, it's a bit of a gut feel, unfortunately. And that's not great for DE&I, obviously. But if you're intentional about your DE&I and you know exactly what you're looking for, then generally it works pretty well. Obviously, not everybody has that superpower, so I wouldn't recommend everyone doing that. And then, you hit Series A is around 20 to 50 employees, right? Those are the people that are not the superheroes that want to take on as much as possible, because you're already managing those people that have to, in fact, reduce their scope, right? And it's not easy to have superheroes that have been building the company with you and all of a sudden you're reducing their scope because you're specializing every role and focus, etc. So you're already managing that, which is difficult. And then you're hiring the new folks that are able to really stay focused, that have a bit more expertise in that domain that you're assigning them to, etc. And once you hit 100 and 150 employees, you need people that love process, that love being in an organized system, that aren't, what I call them cowboys, and that, wild, singular humans that can make anything, that love that freedom. Like, unfortunately, you need to organize the company a little bit more and that want to work with people within a system. So very different humans and very different personalities, and things like that. Then, obviously you define your general values, which is probably honesty and integrity and all that stuff, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to be intentional, and that's a word that I use a lot, whether it's in operations or hiring. A lot of what I've seen, honestly, in the past 24 months is that the hiring has not been intentional. Like the processes are not clean. They're not defined with the hiring managers. The hiring managers don't know what they want. They change it during the process. I mean, it's been a mess, to be honest. And so I would call out a lot of the TA teams and HR operations teams to kind of pause maybe and think really about their 2025 planning and work very closely with the budgeting and the hiring managers that do own that budget at the end of the day, instead of rushing through things and either hiring and firing fast or just being able to be intentional about the process itself, right? We were talking about operations. You have a role, I don't know, a product manager role that you're hiring for, right? You want to have a job description that's actually descriptive of what you're doing and expectations, as well as like a clean process. Okay, you're going to first speak with this person and then this person. You're not going to wing a process. And it's just not good practice. It doesn't make the company look good. Candidates talk to one another. I mean, it's just not best practice. And I don't know. That's not how I do things. I like to do things well and in a fair way. And candidates' time matter, you know? It really does. So, especially for if you do think intentionally about your D&I, applying for jobs and interviewing takes a lot of time. If you're doing 13 interviews in a process, there's something very wrong with the company. Like the fact that you can't make a decision within maybe 5 conversations makes me question the whole department of HR and talent acquisition in most companies, frankly, that do that. And you hear that all the time.
Great. And I realized that was a big question. So let's go into some chapters there. Some of the things that I heard. The first one is around obviously culture and people's values individually. And you talked about sort of 3 core stages as far as what people expect at each stage, and that the first stage in that, pre-revenue stage potentially, or even early revenue, it's very much a get things done, moving forward at pace, lacking structure. So that type of personality right through to, you said, at the later stage where you need someone who's process driven, who can get stuff done and is taking something that's been massaged and evolved and had that dynamic feedback loop and then driving the scale. The question within that, how do you start to connect those early stage employees to the later stage employees if they're coming with different mindsets? Like, what's some of the things you can do to sort of align on the culture fit there?
So that's a great question, and I had to ask myself that very question actually when I was building before my role at Techstars. These people are incredible humans. Like their tolerance for pain is ridiculous. It's similar to yours as founder, right? And so it's really about leveraging their skill set. Generally, and that's not always the case, but generally they're pretty good storytellers. And so if you can scale yourself through them by empowering them in training, the newbies in just being able to share that energy, because the other ones don't have a similar energy and passion, right? And so you want the passionate people to drive and trickle down that passion throughout the organization. And so you then leverage, the skill set of those people. Some of them are actually really good, community building within the organization. Some of them become chief of staff. Some of them become more just the general people, the internal comms people that will want to drive those all hands meetings because they're very good at sharing, their own stories or just even highlighting other people, right? They're generally extroverts, to be honest. So it's a lot easier to kind of leverage that skill set. And you want to highlight them because, frankly, as a founder, without them, nothing would have happened. So you want to give it back to them by giving them a lot of visibility. What's difficult is, as I said, you have to reduce their scope at some point. And a lot of them are generalists when they start in a new company. And so that's what's hard, is to really make sure that they feel valued regardless of the scope, if that makes sense. And so some of them will be more attached to it than others. And it's just being able to support that, explain, but also promote and just continue developing them and their skill sets and the continuous education that they care about and want. And sometimes, I mean, that's happened where those people just don't want their scopes reduced, or they realize that they were really good at sparking the company, and then you'll support them and you'll be like, okay, well, I'll help you get your next thing or find your next company to scale from scratch. And, you know, we'll make sure that your equity is vested so you won't lose anything, because without you, nothing would have happened. Like, there's all those negotiations that happen, and it's really on an individual basis. And it's about either leveraging them and being able to shift them in something that makes sense for the organization and for them, for their career path. And personal goals, or it's, you know, just supporting them in leaving at the right time, right? There's a lot of CEOs that we've seen, not just employees, right, that leave at a certain time in the scaling of their own companies because they say, I'm good from 0 to 50 employees, I don't want to manage it, but beyond that, right? So it really, really depends.
I think that I definitely agree on the extrovert piece in those early stage employees. It feels a lot like investment in a way. If you join an early stage startup as an employee, like there's much higher risk because you're buying into someone else's vision, mission, like something that you feel passionate about. It's not about the money because you're not getting paid much. You might get some equity as part of an early stage employee program that you have within that company, but you're committing to something bigger than, you know, a more traditional type job. Whereas a later stage bet, it's more quantifiable. If you're joining a company, you've got a sense of how long they've been around, how many staff they have, and it feels like you can make a more rounded type of decision. And those two decisions are definitely two different types of personalities. And I think managing both requires a different set of skills.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, first of all, you have to be exposed at some point to both. It's really hard to manage teams if you haven't been exposed to it. Like, I had never been in corporate America until I was the chief of staff at Techstars. And so all of a sudden I was exposed, and it was Techstars. So there was a good mix, you know, of those superheroes and entrepreneurial spirits versus more corporate. And so that was super interesting for me to see and just learn to be exposed to and understand, you know, that language and their preferences. And again, it's more of an individual basis rather than like bucket of people. But I think my experience at Kyndryl, you know, spin-off of IBM, so very, very corporate America, very different to what I had seen, and it was incredible. I love that experience because, again, I'm a curious being and I like learning and just being exposed to as much as I can. And so being able to manage during those different stages, you kind of have to be exposed to it. And so if I had any recommendation to give to young people that are starting in the world is to really be intentional about being exposed to all those different stages. So get your first job in a big company, get a second job in a startup, get your third job in a medium scale company. Because if you really want to become a CEO or be part of a C-suite, you'll need that breadth of experience in order to inform all your decisions. And it's one thing to be an expert at scale, but it's another to really build things from scratch. And so I think if you want to have a full breadth in your career, it's really, really great to see all those stages of scaling.
Yeah, it's great advice. And I've been fortunate to have moved between industries, different size of companies, to founding my own companies. And every one has been a learning experience that together I feel helps me be much more well-rounded and probably more valuable at this point in my career too. But I think having a mix of all those things is actually a superpower in a way to be able to learn, absorb, and have a better perspective potentially as far as like looking at things from different viewpoints rather than being so single-minded with how you think.
I totally agree with you. And also you're able to support the ones that don't have that experience yet to scenario plan and see further ahead what's coming and to be able to prepare for it. So obviously I'm an operator, so risk management is number one in what I do, and identifying single points of failures, etc. And you know, just being able to warn, say, hey, this is going to happen in 6 months. We need to prep for it today. And so that's actually a lot of what I speak about, is that once you've seen that breadth, you're able to build a company day one to get ready to scale to 150 million in revenue, 300 employees, but only if you really have done it enough times and failed enough times and learned enough times as well and done all those postmortems to then really be like, okay, today I'm going to build my 27th company from scratch, but I'm going to like have it so ready that it won't change anything. One example is we were 32 employees at Palmetto and we were making 34 million in revenue year 2. That was insane. I mean, just completely crazy. And COVID did nothing to us. Obviously, it helped us because we were a D2C brand and those were exploding in terms of revenue. But operationally, we just went from in-person to remote and it changed absolutely nothing because we had built our culture intentionally. We had built it over Slack because we were working internationally on top of it immediately. So again, I go back to that word intentionality and making sure that, those 5 pillars of scaling are really, really focused on. And if you can't focus on it as a founder, like try to get someone that wakes up in the morning and literally thinks about that one thing that you care about so you can be intentional as a company. That's really key.
Yeah, it's such good advice. For the work that I do, I apply similar principles across the board. So like people talk about a sequence in a product, I run the same thinking for the growth of a business. So if any startup, doesn't matter what category, you're going to have a series of events that will 100% happen. And like you'd probably say 70, 80% of those are going to be the same in every startup. So knowing what's coming to get to a point that you're trying to hit, from staff to operations to if you have an office space to technology, all the things that you'll have to think about to be able to scale with confidence. You don't need to do them all at once, but knowing that they're going to be milestones that you'll have to hit, and even thinking about who's the person that can do that, where do you need help, how much do you need to spend, and being ahead of that. I feel like that what you just described and your skill set is the ability to sort of know what's coming around the corner to a certain degree and be prepared for that, but also set it up as a vision, as a metric almost, where you're able to go, okay, like we're getting to this point, this is what's going to happen at this point. So I turn that into a question for you, thinking about that process. How do you take an operational side of things for a young early startup where there's a lot of hacking, there's a lot of testing and learning, improvisation sometimes? How do you sort of think about operational process and turning that sort of what feel like mayhem and chaos sometimes into a more well-oiled machine? So when people join, as you scale with, they have a really good idea about this is the company, this is what they do, this is how they run it, and you can train someone on that. Like how do you go about just even understanding that company and then building out a way to make sure that it's streamlined and effective?
I mean, there's a playbook, and a lot of people don't believe me, but it's not about what you're building in terms of like what's the product, right? It doesn't matter whether it's SaaS or B2B or B2C. There's a little bit of a tweak for B2C, obviously, but it's fairly similar. So the only reason it's chaos is because most people are focused on the product and not actually on scaling. So I'll give you an example. And maybe we can just do a quick reminder of the 5 pillars of scaling, right? So you have revenue operations, HR, talent acquisition operations. You have communications, which is like, I'll give you an example, a quick example to illustrate. It's like, what are you using as your internal tool? Is it Slack? Is it something else? Is it email? How often? What's a cadence? That's all the internal stuff, but you have the external stuff too. What are you using to write your press releases? What are you using to distribute it, etc., right? In order to talk about what you're doing and do a bit of a flywheel effect, right? And then you have access to capital. What are you using? Are you going to set up Juniper? Are you going to set up Carter? All those systems for your fundraise, etc., right? And then finally, your mindset. So what are you going to do to foster the culture that you want as a CEO and founder within your organization? You need process around that. You need cadence around that. And that's what you call like business cadence. You need those offsites if you're a virtual first company. You need those weekly huddles or monthly huddles, depending, right? Like those, and that feeds into the internal communication, but also like that growth mindset needs to be integrated. Are you going to implement OKRs, things like that, right? So all of that's operational talk, and that's a playbook that you can do no matter what you're actually building. So to go back to your question again, if it's chaos, that means you're not focused on how you're building your company, you're focused on how you're building your product. And that's a problem.
Yeah. And you talked about at the start of the episode that there seems to be this evolution that's happened with new tools like AI. Great example from just something simple for a person that's hiring someone, skimming a resume and getting key data and making an assessment if that person's suitable or not based off that read. And we know that it's not perfect, but they've adopted a system through to the interview process. Where do you think in the last couple of years that we've gone off the rails a little bit, and that role within corporations to help them scale has sort of lost their way? What are some of the issues that they're not probably acknowledging or trying to repair to be more effective?
I mean, the use of AI, and that's what I keep talking about, like AI is like the internet. We use the internet as a tool every day now, right? It's integrated in our day to day. AI is the same, so it doesn't replace anyone other than it makes you gain scale and speed. There's this company called Invisible, they're incredible. They hired, at the time, I think 700 plus people with two people. Two talent acquisition people hired that number. And obviously, granted, it was a bit specific and it was a bit more like manual work and things like that. So it wasn't, I don't think it was knowledge management. And frankly, like, don't quote me on this. I'll have to ask them to get that information. But it's just incredible how fast you can get through a big pipeline of candidates. But it doesn't mean that that process needs to be horrible for the candidates. And that's what's, mind-blowing, is that the UX and the user journey of the candidates can be excellent even if you're using AI in order to be faster and more productive. So it doesn't mean you're not going to hire like 50 talent acquisition people to do the same job. Sure, but at the end of the day, you're running a business and, you have OPEX, and if you can hire excellent talent acquisition people that you pay more in order to get that result, I mean, by all means. That's my take on it. It's maybe not that popular, but I think if you're very good at what you do, AI will not replace you. It'll just be an extra tool for you to do things at the speed that you're actually supposed to do your thing and implement your superpower. So I think it's great. Yeah. That's the talent acquisition side. But like communications, like a lot of copy, has been being written through ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, etc. And same thing. It's just prompting, and prompting is in fact helping you use your critical thinking and what we're good at as humans, instead of wasting time cranking stuff out, right? I don't know. I use it all the time to create a lot of content, and it's an incredible process. And I have a great time with my ChatGPT, colleague in a way. And sometimes I'll think out loud, and it depends how good you are at using it. It's definitely a great sounding board, I must say.
Yeah, I love the iteration process that I now have with, I use Perplexity primarily. And just that thinking and having a strategy background, I love storytelling, but having database storytelling. So you're actually making sure you're doing the right thing. Because right now, having any confidence in the information that you're given, you can't have, like just the data sources of where it's coming from. It will give you something with such confidence that you don't know whether it's right or not unless you have the expertise. And you also don't know whether it sounds right. And will someone actually relate to that? There's a lot of human element that comes through that personal experience of your own career. But going off on a slight tangent on that one, but back into the process side of things, I agree. Like, if you think about the dot-com boom and everything that went into that, like businesses were growing at breakneck speeds, the money that was getting invested was crazy, and there was this huge cliff that happened. And for me, I see AI as a back-end tool that allows you to do things that you couldn't do, 1-2 years ago without having some serious engineering go behind it. So right now, as far as that process, I think that what I'm seeing as well is that the right people maybe are not finding the right jobs. And then if that's the case, then it has a really negative impact on culture, on retention, on those things. So as far as that process of finding the right people but then retaining them, what are some of the things that, if you're scaling a company, that you need to think about? And there's all those stereotypes of like, oh, you'll have a ping pong table and we'll have Taco Tuesday and all these things. But what are some of the things that you've either seen work well or maybe even not work well on the retention side to maintain that culture outside of that single vision of what you're trying to achieve?
I think this is an excellent question. I think most companies haven't figured it out. They're very good at acquisition just because it's a numbers game, but retention's interesting. Why is it interesting? We have 5 generations in the workplace for the very first time ever, which completely care about very, very different things and even don't have the same values, the same work ethic, the same, need for independence, the same personalities and all that good stuff, right? So there's that one factor that's massive that most people ignore. Just recently, I think it was last week, EY published one-pager on different data points regarding the 5 generations. But I've been speaking about this for about 3 years now. So it's kind of great to finally see that be top of mind. With AI obviously provoking that a lot because, a lot of the older generation are like, what's a GPT? So whereas, you have Gen Alpha that's just already using it to do all their homework and, it's already been integrated in the education system. So the speed at which people are used to doing things between the different generations is just so different, right? So there's that piece. There's a second piece that the younger generations, so millennials and younger generations, are a lot more educated in doing stuff. So let's talk about the startup world. The venture capital process is no longer an elite group. Like just in New York, you have 1,200 VCs, right? Just in this one city. Meaning that everybody's fundraising a fund for a fund. And that means they understand that process. A lot of the employees, unfortunately, let's say the women, people of color, etc., are not as educated in that space in negotiating their package. For instance, most people don't know that they should negotiate their severance as they start a new job, right? Most people don't know how to negotiate equity or don't understand what equity is, investing, etc. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen in general on the individual basis. And then companies, they use tools, as you said, like the more fun tools that kind of generate some sense of belonging. But, we're all working remotely now. So the sense of belonging, most remote cultures are either not intentional, so not good, or they're extremely good because they figured it out. But that's probably maybe 5 companies that I know of at different scales. So Dropbox is one of the first ones, actually, that went virtual. Virtual first, rather, and stayed like that in comparison to the other big tech companies. There's a company called ShareByte, for instance, a Series B company, and they support virtual first workplaces by helping HR departments fund meals. So, for instance, if you want to go have on a geographic basis, a meal with your colleagues, but you happen to all work from home, then you can. And the company pays for it, and there's a whole process for that. So there are a lot of companies actually that are supporting that, but unfortunately most HR departments, they don't really know what to do in terms of how to create and foster that sense of belonging to have that retention. There was a study, I think it came out maybe last year or before that, where if you have a best friend at work, you're more likely to stay. And so being able to create those moments for people to connect deeply, to build those friendships, and that starts with onboarding. And that's part of business operations, basic business operations, your onboarding process and your cohorts, the buddy systems, the mentoring systems. I hear every day, oh, my mentor, we speak once a month, sure. But that's not real mentorship, right? There's processes and systems to create a little bit more space for emotional connection rather than process connection. But most places there isn't even a process connection. So I think starting with that is a good way to do it. So again, culture starts with day one of the employee, and mapping out that user journey is super important. And so onboarding, my biggest thing being a scuba diver is the buddy system. It's really your trauma bonding and starting at this company where everything's a mess, or not, right? But you're starting together and all you got is one another, basically. And that usually creates incredible bonding, and I've seen it in all the companies I've built. And unfortunately for myself, I don't have that because I was the one being the spark, but it's really great to see the teams continue those friendships years and years beyond, that moment in time where they worked at that company.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I joined a startup during the pandemic, and we didn't get to meet in person for, must have been close to 18 months, I would say, 12 to 18 months. And it was amazing the difference of having a couple of days together as a team, like the effectiveness that came off the back of that. There's a sense of camaraderie, you have closer bonds with people, and it builds trust in the sense of like you are in this together. Whereas if you never meet the person, then like the relationship is never going to be as strong. And you talk to that emotional connection that you have with someone. There's so much that goes into that. And it's, we've got a live case study happening right now with the pandemic driving that, and then we've had a shift. It'll be interesting at what point in the coming years that work from home versus in office, will it ever go back? I don't think so, but we'll get a good sense of how people feel, company success and effectiveness, and this next generation of technology which is coming through. There's so much at play, and I think today it's probably a good place to wrap up as far as the next 12 months and some of the things that you're seeing. Like what would be something that you would love to see change in that scale up stage of startups as far as people and culture, or what are some of the biggest things that could probably drive an impact?
Oh, it's hard to choose. Lots of things. But I think I'm going to go back to that special word that I really like. If you're intentional about what you're doing and you really want to build a company that's going to last more than 6 months, then you need to think about what it's going to look and feel like 2 years down the road, right? At 110 employees, let's say. And not being afraid to do that. Because yes, you're so busy in the day-to-day trying to survive, get funding, etc. But first of all, it grounds you, right? If you're looking in the future and you're like, okay, I am now, today, your NPV situation. Today, I am the CEO of a 110 employee company. And then it actually helps you act like it, because it's not the same as when you're, a founder of a product with an intern. You don't act the same. And being able to project yourself into that will help you in just even that energy with investors, with understanding where you're going, and giving some distance to whatever you're building, just because, you can get lost, and being grounded just helps focus. And I understand that it's hard to do it all the time, but maybe 15 minutes at the end of every day, whenever you define the end of your day, right? Because I understand that can be 14-hour days, is sit down and be like, okay, let's say that today, 2 years down the road, I'm the CEO of a 110-person, company. What would today have looked like? What would I have done differently? Would I have taken that call, yes or no? Would I have written that email that way? Like things like that. Do a little bit of a postmortem every day, 15 minutes, and project yourself 2 years down the road in how you would have dealt with, that specific day. I mean, I do that quite often, actually, in order to stay focused in where I'm going, as opposed to what I'm doing.
Great advice, and what a perfect way to end today's episode. I don't do that, but it sounds like something that I should do as well. I'm a reflective person and love to learn and grow, and I'm always open for feedback. But I think if you're a founder, that kind of just regimented process is actually so helpful, because it's easy to get lost in everything happening and not think about success, think about failures, think about all those things as a company level, but also at a personal level, which is the secret sauce, right? As an inspiring leader with intentionality, you need to be at your best, and that requires a lot of outside looking in type thinking. So, Christelle, it's always fun. I love that we did this in a formal capacity on a podcast. We do this a lot out in person, but I appreciate you making the time. I know you've got a lot going on as well, like usual, which is always fun, but thank you for joining. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This is Method Startups Decoded. Please follow, share, do all the things that help us grow and continue these conversations, and look forward to joining you again in our next episode.